Have you been thinking about getting a pendant type Anthurium, something with long strappy leaves, but you're unsure about what to get? Have I got a special one that I want to talk to you about today and give you my first initial thoughts after growing it for a few months? Say hello to the Anthurium Wendlingeri. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So again, I'll start off the video kind of apologising in advance. I am not well, I've got the flu or a cold or something like that. I'm very bunged up, so I might be sounding a bit nasally at the moment. I filmed a couple of videos, this is the second one I'm filming on the same day back to back, so bear with me. Hopefully by the next time you get the following week you should get videos where I'm a bit more myself and a bit more healthy. But I wanted to do a review video today on the Anthurium Wendlingeri. And some of you that are eagle-eyed might actually say, you know what, you've not even had it for a year yet. Yes, but I know this is a plant that a lot of people are constantly asking me about in my comments. How is it growing and all these things. So instead of waiting for the full year, I think this might be 6 months now, it might be just shy of, but I thought I'd give you a bit of an update as to how it's doing and give you my thoughts and review so far. I can do a full-on review as well at a year stage or even a 2-year stage for those that are really interested. So looking at some of the background on this plant, so again, for the people that have been here for a while, this is one that I've been trying to find for a very long time. And I'll see if I can put a picture here of the inflorescence. It's less so about the strappy leaves, but it's more about the inflorescence. And ironically enough, with these types of anthuriums that we're all getting these days, the inflorescence generally isn't the reason why people would buy it. It would be the leaves, the texture of the leaves, the structure of the plant, rather than the more traditional anthuriums that we're all used to seeing over the years in big box stores and also garden centers. These are different. But this one's got that very interesting kind of corkscrew inflorescence. Mine is nowhere near that at this particular moment in time, but it's need depending on how you look at it. But I wanted to get this plant for a good few years, and this was always on the expensive side. I mean, I don't think this was massively cheap when I got it, and I don't know if I can find the price for this. If I can, I'll add it at the top there. But this was not cheap, generally speaking. But this is one that, because of that reason, because of that inflorescence, people wanted it. I kind of assumed that it might have been a slow grower, but again, we'll touch about the speed of growth, at least in my experience. But yeah, this is one that is a bit different. You might be able to see that's its newest leaf there. These are some of the oldest leaves. These are the kind of leaves that it came to me with. So I have grown 1, 2, 3, and 4 leaves in my care. They're very leathery. There's a tiny bit of like ruffling in that leaf. I don't know whether or not that's going to come up. If I kind of shine the light on it, you might be able to see those bumpinesses. I'm gonna words. But yeah, it's got a very interesting structure. But overall, not a plant that you see every day, because if you look at something like the Vitarifolium or a lot of the other pendant anthuriums, their leaves tend to be slim all the way down. But can you see what's happening here? That's got a very slim petiole and it goes wide and it goes down here. I think the Anthurium Pandalumilanium? Butchered that name. But there's another one that's similar where it's got a very thin petiole and it's got wide strappy leaves rather than thin strappy leaves. This is one that's very similar to that one. So let's talk speed of growth with this one. So speed of growth with this one, and I touched on it a moment ago, I had assumed that this was going to be a slow anthurium and an inconsistent grower based on the price and based on the fact that I was trying to find a more mature version of this plant. And they would occasionally come up, but they were ridiculously priced. They were definitely in the triple digits, sometimes mid triple digits as well, for a large specimen of these. And my kind of thinking always, when I was thinking about that and kind of a speed of growth, I'm just like, oh, so it's obviously going to be a slow grower or an inconsistent grower, things like that. But actually, so far, and granted, it's predominantly been the growing period when I've had it, so spring and summer. We're now only just coming into kind of, well, we're kind of almost at the end of autumn and going into winter, but it is still growing for me. So again, let's benchmark this the way that I would normally benchmark other plants. So using a golden pothos in my space in the growing season, a golden pothos on one vine might grow 2 to 3 leaves each month for me in here. Now, this, in the growing season, and even now, I get at least a leaf per month. And it might not seem like it's very fast, but actually for an anthurium and for a pendant anthurium, that's not bad, especially considering how small and how juvenile this is. You might be able to see the smallest little yellow leaf down here, but that was obviously one of its kind of the earliest leaves it had when it was still very young seedling. So I'm expecting that one to go yellow. I'm not worried about that tiny yellow leaf there, whilst everything else is doing really well. So for me, I would say this is average speed of growth towards fast for a pendant anthurium. So into ease of propagation. And I haven't propagated this yet because I've only just received it, but much like a lot of the other pendant anthuriums, you do get this really pronounced growing stem, which actually the internodal spaces, so the spaces between the nodes, you can see a node there, there's another node up here, is actually decent. It's not super wide. I'm trying to think, the Veterifolium is actually more narrow, I find. This has actually got a bit more space, so if you wanted to take a cutting, I would imagine this is quite easy to take a cutting. And based on the fact that it is a pendant anthurium, as long as you're propagating that cutting in something like a propagation box, you should do relatively well, and it should kind of root out quite quickly. I'm trying to look at the roots in here and just kind of go, how fast have they been growing? I've also just watered this today because if you've been here long enough, you know, not thinking. But the roots haven't grown super fast, I will say that. But yeah, I would say this should be relatively straightforward to propagate. If you've got other experiences, because as I said, I haven't propagated it, I'm just basing it on what I'm seeing physiologically on this plant, on how easy it would be to propagate. But if you have propagated the Wendlingeri Anthurium, do let us know down below. Was it easy? Was it hard? Just so that everybody can kind of get an understanding. So moving into the availability of this plant, and again, I touched on this a bit earlier. So this has been interesting because, as I said, it's in the market, it would come up occasionally. You would get really juvenile plants, kind of like a step or a sachet away from a seedling, but not much bigger. And I'm just sitting there going, is this slow? But as I mentioned earlier on, at least in my experience, in my space, with the care that I am giving this hasn't been that slow of an anthurium, so I'm trying to understand why. It might just be when you're looking at some things like availability and kind of the supply and demand that is happening from people, that maybe this is one of the plants that I don't think necessarily there's a huge number of people that are looking for this, because I know some people, the people that would want it for the corkscrew kind of inflorescence, but I don't think there's a huge volume of people that would want this. However, there is something to be said about the willingness of the audience that is looking for that specific plant and how much they're willing to pay for it. So I'll give you an example. If this plant was in the quadruple digits and people were comfortable paying those figures for this for a very long period of time, and it's only recently that it started dropping down, then it means the sellers aren't going to discount it and lose out on money. It kind of makes sense in terms of business. Well, I don't know, not everybody likes talking about this, but for the sellers, this is a business. But so if there's still people willing to spend like £1,000, $1,000 for a large specimen of this, then why would they sell it to you for 500 if they can get 1,000? Do you see what I mean? So, and it could also be because of that, they didn't do a huge mass propagation. Again, think about something like the Philodendron gloriosum when it first hit the market. It's a relatively consistent, fast-growing philodendron. It shouldn't be too difficult to grow or propagate. But because there was so much demand for it, the prices stayed a bit higher, and the growers probably controlled a bit of that and just said, let's like eke this out a little bit so we can make as much money out of this as possible. I'm not saying that any of this is right, or ethics is a tricky one here, but it is the nature of business sometimes. This is one of those things. So with this, if there wasn't that many people looking for it and they're willing to pay those higher figures, possibly that is why this plant stayed as expensive as it was, even though, at least from what I'm seeing now, it doesn't look like it would be particularly difficult to propagate. It doesn't seem like it's a particularly slow grower either. But maybe there's just not that many people that are looking to purchase it, and the ones that they're willing to spend a bit more to do that. So I don't know. I mean, to be fair, I don't think I paid triple digits for this. I think this was mid towards high double digits when I got it, and it wasn't a huge plant. But to be fair, I think this might have been a Grow Tropicals purchase. They had a few. It took them a bit because I kept seeing it on their shop for a while to get them all out the door, but eventually they did manage to get all of them out the door at the price that it was. So I'm just sitting there going, if it's selling at that price, why would they bring it down like this? Let me give you a more specific example. So say there's a TV. TV is a tricky one with technology, but say there's a TV that's selling for £1,000 and people are buying it like that. They're all buying it, really happy for the £1,000, and they're not having an issue where people have stopped buying it. Why would they bring that TV down to £500? Do you see what I mean? But the moment that the demand starts dropping a bit, it's probably where the sellers are going, oh, I've got a lot of this now because I thought I could make all this money. I'm happy to make a bit less. Let's drop it down and get rid of some of this stock. Similar situation. So is this more available now? I'm seeing this a lot more on the market. Has the price dropped a lot? Probably not that much, not as much as you would imagine. And do I think it's going to get much cheaper? I don't know. I don't think it will, because if it would have dropped, I would have assumed it would have dropped significantly by now. So I think there's enough people that are interested and enough people willing to pay that money, but not enough people that are interested and willing to like drop that price, if that makes sense. So let's come into pests with this one, and this is an interesting one. Granted, I have not had it for so long, and I'm kind of trying to see here, because this is around other plants that have got both mealybugs and thrips. I don't know if it's around anything that's got spider mites, but actually, nothing. So far, I've not had this for very, very long. So far, none, absolutely none. No thrips. I'm trying to see. No thrips, no spider mites, no mealybugs. It's doing quite well. But to be honest, with the exception of a couple of strap-leaf anthuriums, most of these pendant type anthuriums, this one, the Vitarifolium occasionally might get a pest on it. This one I've not probably had it for long enough to see a pest on it yet, but they don't seem to be too bothered by pests. They're quite good. But let's come into accessories and care for this one. Broken record, fair warning. Soul Ninja's Anthurium soil mix. And I know I do feel bad because a lot of my American audience, I don't think Soil Ninja's with you just yet. I know Europe has only just started getting them in the last year. UK, we've had it for a while. And I know that obviously you can make your own soil mixes. It's just in a very, for the Americans out there, the Soil Ninja Anthurium soil mix is just very chunky. Think about it, I would say, 50% would be the orchid bark, maybe the other 30% might be perlite or kind of other chunky airy bits, and maybe only 10 or 20% would be cocoa coir. It's very, very, very light. But it's done really well. Like, I've done it the usual way with my clear plastic pots. You don't have to, and I've got the kind of the holes that I kind of burn into it just so it can get a bit more ventilation. That seems to help. It doesn't seem to be hindering this plant. I water this, unlike a lot of my anthuriums, a lot of my other anthuriums, because I thought this was much more like the Botterifolium that likes to stay dry or go almost entirely dry between waterings, otherwise it will rot. This one I found that I need to water it just before it goes fully dry, if that makes sense. So that's one thing. I've also got this kind of looking towards the window. This is kind of getting quite bright indirect light, I would say. So would this maybe grow a bit slower if I had it in lower light? Possibly. Because I know, and some of you might be noticing, that some of your anthuriums, if you give them too bright of light, they tend to slow down a bit. This one is in bright indirect light. It is not burning the leaves. It hasn't throughout any of the growing season, and it's doing really, really, really well. Same thing goes in terms of fertilizing. As with all of my other plants, this will get fertilized weekly, if that makes sense. So a week amount of fertilizers, even more weak now in the winter, in the autumn and winter time. And I'll do that every time I water it. And it seems to be doing quite well. And as I said, I always say this, and I think we've all said this for a long time, if your plant is still in active growth and they're still bringing out leaves, try making sure that you're giving them some of the fertilizer. I've also done a whole thing that touches on in much more detail in terms of fertilizing specifically for epiphytic plants and terrestrial plants within the houseplanty world, and I'll link it at the top there. Really, really cool video. I think that a lot of people were quite happy with that video. I was as well when I was filming it. So yes, this is definitely an epiphytic plant, so you don't need to be that heavy with the fertilizer, but it seems to be enjoying it. So let's do some final thoughts and kind of do the scores that I would normally do with most of these plants in the reviews. So let's do the first thing that I usually ask. So knowing what I know now, if I didn't have this plant, would I purchase it? Knowing what I know now? Yes, 100%. Really enjoying this plant. It's not giving me any grief. It's growing consistently well for an anthurium, touch wood, that I haven't jinxed it. And I do enjoy these leaves, the kind of thicker, wider pendant leaves with that thinner petiole. I think it's quite cool, and it's quite interesting on how it's growing. I did have one of you a while back when I was unboxing this who said, try growing it kind of almost a bit mounted like that, because that's how it would grow in nature. And I was planning on doing it, but I kind of left it in for a few weeks, and it's already doing that. You might be able to see there how that is kind of growing, and it will eventually come out of the pot and drop down, and then I have to tie it up the way that I do with my Botterifolium. It's a whole thing. But this definitely would repurchase, or would purchase, knowing what I know now, if I didn't have it. Now in terms of a score, so the score is going to be an interesting one on this one. I don't think I'm going to do more than just one score. From 0 or 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, in my opinion, for actually how straightforward it is to grow, how easy it is to grow, and generally how consistent it is in terms of its growth. But factoring in the fact that this is still relatively expensive, this would be a solid 8, I think, for me. Solid 8 for me. Possibly I would do it a bit higher if it was a bit cheaper. I wanted a more mature form, and I probably would have given it a bit more of a better score, but this is probably going to be the size that most of everybody else is going to be buying them in, because obviously if it's more mature, you'll get the inflorescence a bit earlier. But yeah, a solid 8 on this, and really, really glad I've added this to my collection, more than you can possibly imagine. So as I said, this has been a kind of shorter review period because I've not had it for that long. I generally don't like putting out videos like this very often. And it should also give you an idea on the fact that people have been requesting this as much as they have, so I've done it earlier, as to kind of what the demand still is around this plant specifically. So yeah. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about the Anthurium Wendlingeri. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you've got one as well, did you get it recently? Have you got a more mature specimen? Is yours, has yours got the corkscrew? Please tell me so I can feel jealous. But yeah, tell us what you think, if you've got this, if you've had it, what were your experiences? My experience is not the be-all and end-all. This is just me talking about how I'm growing my plants in my care and my space. It might be different from everybody else. Put them down below. As I always say with these videos, it's a good place for this information to be a repository, so when somebody's doing their research before or after they've bought the plant, they can find a whole host of information, because we all know that the internet isn't great with this, because the majority of times all you can find is seller websites, which they give you some basic information, but that's not usually great, I find. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.